Hello and welcome to Mechanics of the Fourth Wall with myself, Nathan Oakley, and Antonio Subirats.
Hello, Nathan.
Hello, Antonio. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Today's episode, we will be discussing subliminal messages and the propaganda used to indoctrinate false beliefs into our cognition. So, yeah, Antonio, can you start us off? We had a long conversation last night, and I think, got a bit of an echo. Let's just get rid of that.
Do I need my headphones?
Nah, we're all good. It was me with the live feed. Okay. I thought I'd figure that bit out. Yeah, I mean, I want to follow on from the last episode, but we had a very long conversation last night, which sort of revolved around the indoctrination of ideas, and a lot of it was based on subliminal messages and such. That was kind of the point I wanted to start at today. Was there something that you wanted to get out into the forefront about what we're actually doing here, or did you want to kick straight off with that?
We can kick off straight off with that, with what we were discussing last night, the subliminal and the propaganda influence on our psyche and therefore our experience of the world.
I mean, that sort of led on though, didn't it? Because we were talking about frequencies and vibrations, not necessarily sound, but along those lines, that you were defining as a kind of collective consciousness. And going on to subliminal messages, I was linking it to the way that the powers that should not be, or the media, or the propaganda, however you want to phrase it, will put ideas in our minds through images that create chemical releases. So in the case of subliminal messages, it usually uses one of two formulas, either the sex cell or the death cell. And although they're not necessarily in plain sight, they're hidden in artwork, or however you want to phrase it, and it's to induce a chemical reaction, but it's to kind of replicate the this is where I'll hand over to you, really, the collective consciousness. Do you want to take it back that one step before we get into the subliminal programming?
Okay, so the collective consciousness and the collective unconscious, we have a shared agreement on reality on the collective consciousness side of the world, where the sun brings light and heat and various different aspects. On the collective unconscious, we're not really aware of the elements that influence us because they're unconscious influences. And the subliminal works on those unconscious influences, the propaganda on the conscious. So we know that there are energetic forms that actually mold our experience of the world. Like you said, when springtime comes, everybody perks up. Now, this is an energy that's having an influence on us. Our brain chemistry, our synapses function on a combination of chemistry and energy. It's electro signals, it's electricity that fires off synapses. The chemicals are there to allow the firing to communicate between one synapse and the transmitter and receiver. So it's a combination of the two, the chemicals, which are released through images and various different things that you just said, and the energy. So if the energy is of a form that leads to depression, like in the middle of the winter, then all we need is depressing news, depressing TV shows, with a little bit of relief. And the relief, like Dancing with the Stars or something that makes us laugh, we get a sense of relief from that, and we then cherish that relief, which addicts us to those TV shows. And it's a very clever ploy, because they can pass anything through those TV shows. It will go through our conscious mind to our unconscious, and we will accept whatever's being told as inevitable, as that's just how life is, and all these other ideas that we just assume we have to accept.
Well, this is the ideas and ultimately what they create, which is belief systems. It's not just, you said TV, but it's, again, back to the conversation last night when we were kind of developing ideas for this show. It's not just TV. If you ignore what we see when we look out our window or when we're outside, it's everything else. So it's the TV, it's your iPad, it's your computer, searches on Google, YouTube lookups. They're all manipulated. Now, we can argue that what we're doing right here, right now is true, and it is. It's real, it's live. People can see what we're saying and how we're saying it, and the fumbles and the mistakes. However, the system that's in place to present this information is still manipulated. There's still advertising on YouTube, and there's certain places that they can take you to. And that can create a certain amount of paranoia about that system. And I think that's why they do it. A lot of the programming that we discussed on the last show is deliberately left in place or even promoted so that it creates that discord in your mind, that unease, that fear is intentional. So in the case of subliminal messages that lead you down an avenue of finding occult worship, they're very much not necessarily promoted, although it seems that way to me, but they're done in such a way that it keeps you in a perpetual state of fear.
Yes, and it's done in various different forms. So you've got the alarm sense of fear, the panic sense, and you've got the mild, more enduring, depressing, exhausting, persistent fear. So we have the propaganda, the media, and the news work on that more persistent, long-term, down, low energy type fear. And then we have peaks of the alarm kind of fear with news items like Ebola. Oh, somebody with Ebola is in the UK. Now people are going to schools that have just come back from the Ebola regions. And you think, what the heck? You know, all this, if you're not aware that this is all just systems to try to manipulate your energy and therefore your thoughts, you're lost.
I think that might need a little bit more explaining. So you're saying about the Ebola. I think this is UK news based, where they have people who've come back from those regions and are televised in schools, explaining that they've been to those areas that are infected with Ebola. And then I don't know how long you said it was, but maybe a couple of weeks later, somebody comes back and they're on the news for being screened and found negative for it. So you're gently being introduced with an idea of Ebola, and then you're seeing people in schools from that area. Or no, that I correct myself. That was predictive programming. It was there before. Is that correct?
Yes. And the way it's used is on the foundation of the constant, persistent, low energy fear, which makes us adhere to figures of authority who can protect us, or I should say, those who believe in authority and protection of that kind. And on that foundation of that kind of fear, we have these peaks of fear. So if you don't accept any of the fear nonsense, that the low energy sense that they try to inculcate, then the peaks are just seen as completely absurd, as obviously manipulated, as obviously nonsensical. There is no chance that the Centre for Disease Control in the UK would allow anybody who has any even mere possibility of being affected by Ebola loose on schools. That's just not something that is likely to happen, that would happen. The media can report this, but the people, the scientists and the doctors who are there to make sure that there are no pandemics wouldn't allow it. And those are the people who are like genuine human beings, who are genuinely doing what they think is best for the nation, for their brothers and sisters, and for their tribe. They wouldn't allow it. But we don't give those people air. They don't get any air. They don't get to go on the news and say there is absolutely nobody coming in with any hint of Ebola who's being allowed to walk around freely around airports. You know, that's just not going to happen. And it's as simple as controlling the airports out.
They will continually repeat the same thing. So some of the American YouTubers will expose a fictitious piece of news, and they'll show that it's done on every single network at the same time, and then repeat it over and over again at time intervals. And it's that repetition that creates the illusion of fact, of reality. And the media uses this all the time. But they take it one step further when the idea gets a little bit complicated. And in the case of the globe light, it's hundreds of years in order to achieve this effect. But you have the systems in place where now there may not be any particular person or power behind some of these systems that are put into place. And as they get picked apart, it induces, I assume, a little bit of panic. We certainly see this with NASA releases of their rather terrible footage. But you boil this down to being called the X factor. So in other words, where there's a system in place, and I'll use this example. So you have the ridicule system, the system whereby we are trained as individuals to ridicule the idea of the earth being flat. Well, when that system falls to pieces, when you have people like us that ignore the ridicule, suddenly that system, which has been perfectly effective for hundreds of years, falls apart, and there is no reconciliation for that. There's no way to get around that. There's no way to avoid people who start to ignore the TV, start to ignore the iPad suggestions on YouTube, or question what they find when they search on a Google search. And I'll bring this back to this point eventually. But in 1984, you have the example where you have control of the books, and you get that disconnect with the people who are working at the ministry, where they'll ignore what they're actually doing and just focus on the doing rather than the information. And in modern times, we have the internet, where the control of information is complete. It's total. And although we are doing what we're doing now, we've got an even better example with the maps. So we have all of the globalists trying to fight for the definitive map. And in terms of the globe, there is only one definitive map, and it's controlled by Big Brother, and that's Google Earth, which is the same way that they will eventually go with all materials. None of it will be books, it will all be online, and the control of the information and the flow of that information, not just the content, is Big Brother. It's completely controlled.
Yes. So the ridicule element, which has been one of the enemy's greatest tool, is really backfiring on them, because people like you and me and many listeners out there will be listening out for ridicule on other topics. So I want to bring it to Muammar Gaddafi. We had ridicule, the ridicule that was aimed at Muammar Gaddafi, surrounded by these virgin female bodyguards, stunningly sexy, with the film by Sacha Baron Cohen, The Dictator, and all of these things, all of these elements of ridicule are basically there to stop people, the normal human being who might have no opinion one way or another, into looking into it, because it's surrounded by ridicule and they don't want to join in with any of that. Now, what's happening is, when we hear about anybody or any system being ridiculed, our ears prick up and we see this is what they've done with the flat earth. Why are they doing this now with North Korea? The ridicule, all of these things. So we focus so that the tool that they have used is now working against them. And it's great, really, the way whatever's been leveled, whatever their weapons have been, are turning against them. Now, you mentioned 1984 and how the system works. In 1984, there's very little mention of money, of exchange of money. So the system in 1984, so we can compare it to how we live today with telescreens that actually can speak directly to us, like they speak to Winston Smith. He needs to do more exercise. And those elements were all to do with political control of thought to support the political system of Big Brother. The system we have is the same kind of weapons, the same avenues, but it's not so much for control merely of the political system. It's more for control of for our use and acceptance of the financial system. That's because, if you're bankrupt, that's it. You're ineffective. So the political avenue that was being used in 1984, it's the same, only it's more to do with the financial system, which is at its inception and foundation, the political system. It is the political system, but it's being used as the main source for the manipulation, the propaganda, the mechanisms by which the powers that be receive information and target information back. The whole feedback that we have with commerce and advertising, where you can mention a word. I'll say this because I said it to you, but there'll be viewers who won't be aware of this. I work with models sometimes. I'm working with a model. I have my laptop on, okay, but I'm working with a model, maybe 7-8 feet away from the laptop. Now the laptop is just playing music, but I'm 7-8 feet away with the model, and she's left her boots. Now, her boots were like Doc Martens. They weren't Doc Martens, but they were very similar style. And I just mentioned that we spoke about her boots because they were kind of cool. They were bright white, whereas Doc Martens are usually black or maroon, various different colors. But I just mentioned, I said, oh, they're striking. Are they Doc Martens? And we had a little brief conversation about that. After our session finishes and she's left, I come onto the laptop. I put my drawing materials away. I come to the laptop to find something on YouTube to play or whatever. And suddenly, everywhere I turn, there are adverts for Doc Martens. Okay. Now, I had not come on and done a search for Doc Marten, which you can understand how doing a search for something would leave a cookie that's spread around and various different things. But just mentioning to somebody else what you assume out of earshot, you assume that your laptop is not spying on you, but it is. So
well, you say we don't assume that the laptop is spying on us, but we give people full and open permission to do this. So Odd TV just released a video where he speaks into his artificial intelligence toilet roll and asks it if the Earth is a globe. And it says, oh no, he asks if the Earth is a ball. And it says, no, the Earth is not a testicle. And one of the comments was to say, that thing's listening to you, get rid of it. And I had to reply and say, well, every time you turn on your phone and sign on to iOS or Windows or whatever, you sign an agreement that says you give them full permission, and it's dressed up in the guise of Cortana or Siri or whatever. But we essentially give permission to listen to our devices, and I have no doubt that the camera applies to that as well. You know, it seems that people get all shocked and shaken when they realise that they're being listened to. In the case of your Doc Marten example, it's a lot more subtle than most people might even pick up on or detect, until you realise, well, you've given them full permission to do this. It's not just exactly a shock that the mic's picked up on a keyword and is now advertising that item to you. At least it doesn't shock me. But that kind of Big Brother mentality has been introduced very steadily and very slowly. So an example here where I live in Leamington, there's a mass of CCTV cameras, but there's also listening stations dotted around the town centre that will literally listen for keywords. Now, I've no idea if there's a little man with a pair of headphones at the end of those listening stations, or if it's just a computer that's picking out keywords using voice recognition software. But in either case, we're not just being listened to in our homes on the devices we give permission to, we're listened to on the street as well as being watched. So the kind of the search for keywords, if you want to phrase it that way, is so predominant in every facet of our daily life. You know, unless you went out to the country, you've got eyes and ears on you all the time.
Yes, and these eyes and ears, we can take the explanations for them at face value, and there is a valid explanation, which is if targeting and production is based on the actual demand for objects, then there would be less obsolete, there would be less overproduction and therefore more waste, so that there will be less of that. And that's plausible, yes. If there was a system for finding out that there were 50 million people who wanted a specific type of gene, all of the other types of genes that might be hoped to be sold to those 50 million people wouldn't be made. So yes, there's a rational explanation for this. There's also, it's a lot simpler and cheaper to target individuals directly, like in Minority Report, where the advertising is directed at the main character. It's individualized, the advertising. And we have that right now. We have individualized, targeted advertising. That's
absolutely. So above the station, I did a little video on this, but above the station in New Street, Birmingham, there's a great big TV, and it's in the shape of an eye. Go figure. But it works on that technology that they have up and down the country in petrol stations, where they literally have an iris, and it knows what it's going to advertise to you. It's very clever technology, but it's targeting the audience that's in front of it. It's amazing in terms of technology. I have a lot of respect for it, but it's also quite terrifying.
Well, what I have a kind of it's a vague hope that all of these technologies will eventually be used solely for the positive, benevolent reasons that it can be used, like the conservation of resources, not because we're running out of resources, but simply because waste is not a requirement of society. We do not need waste. It's a result of poor planning, but I'm hoping that one day all the technologies that we see around us will be used for positive reasons. Right now, we know that we have an elite and a financial system that will murder people to keep itself alive. When that system is no longer functioning in the way it functions now, then these mechanisms will be able to be used appropriately, benevolently. So I would like, though, if it's okay, Nathan, if you were to explain to people what you explained to me about the cancellation of sound between the two microphones on your mobile phone, so that people who aren't aware can start to understand the intricacies of some of the technology. Because
sure.
Right now, we say
the sound cancelling technology. So it's probably, most people will be familiar with this with headphones. So you can get certain types of headphones that have got a second microphone that sits on the outside, and it's just measuring the differences so that you can cancel out those sounds. And the same principle applies on a phone. So you've got your microphone on the bottom. I'm not sure how well you can see it. And then you've got a microphone on the back, and that will cancel out the sounds. If you're at a concert, to the degree that you can have a great big loud concert playing, and you can still hold a reasonably decent phone conversation because it's cancelling out the sound. But that principle's working all day long if the mic's left live. So there might be, a whole bunch of background noise, and it's still going to be able to discern what's what. It's very, very clever. But it's back to just listening, and we give permission to do this. We shouldn't be shocked that people are listening to what we say and do. It's something that I've been acutely aware of. I know Mark Knight was talking about this when I interviewed him. He used to do a lot of Windows programming, and he was saying that the hooks were put in Windows 7. They were just done surreptitiously. Is that the right word?
Yes. Yes.
And now that it's refined and works beautifully, they're quite happy to dress it up with Siri and present it to us in a very obvious way. And it seemed to me, I'm quite keen on the tech world, so I was keeping a fairly close eye on this. Nobody threw their dummy out of the pram when Windows 7 came along, but when it was made obvious that they were going to do this, to listen, people started getting very angry. And it's like Mark Knight said, it's been done for a very, very long time. People just weren't aware of it. So you kind of have to ask yourself, why are they making us aware of it? And it's back to a bit of fear porn, knowing that they can listen with a bit of justification, so that, like with the globe lie, if you look into it, the mechanics of the heliocentric model are very well out there. It's easy to research and come up with debunkings for what we actually see in real life. And the same principle applies when you're being told that you're going to be listened to. You can have, since I don't know when Windows 7 came out, quite some time ago, probably 2006, maybe a bit later. But they have had a very long time to dress that up and give the excuses and give plausible deniability to what they're doing. I mean, we've taken quite a few steps forward, because I was hoping to go through the way that they use the sex cell and the death cell in the subliminal world. So on the last show, we were saying, well, nothing's really hidden. And kind of what I was hoping to get across was not that it isn't invisible to some, in the same way that the globe line, nobody will pick up on the fact that there's globes on every single TV show and, you know, backdrops to their websites. And people don't pick up on this until you know about it. That subtle subliminal programming isn't hidden, but at the same time it is, unless you're aware of it. And that more subtle level of programming, where it is actually being hidden into the artwork, will work on that part of your subconscious, that primeval part of your brain that wants to survive and wants to reproduce. And I've always had a fascination with that, especially as in recent times it transpires that that's not being done to hide the surface level of deception. So it's not designed to hide death or death masks or horror pictures or ghouls. It's there to induce a chemical reaction. It's there to put you in an emotional state. And it's so prevalent, it's so rife, that we are continually kept in this emotional state. And we speculated when we spoke yesterday about that emotional state being manipulated one step further beyond the visual stimulation into the auditory stimulation, be it through the microphone, the speaker on your iPad, right up to the microwave transmitters that we have dotted all over the country, and the way that those can potentially manipulate you with sound. I'm sorry, I'm waffling a little bit here, Antonio, but I'll give that a little bit more of an explanation. And it's one of my favourite subjects. So it's hi-fi. And in hi-fi, one of the things that a very high-end hi-fi manufacturer will do is use high-frequency drive units, little tiny speakers that do the higher end of the frequency range, that go way, way, way beyond what you can actually hear. And it's because your body will detect these frequencies, and the detection of those higher frequencies, despite the fact that you can't actually hear them, will create more of a realism. And I think in the last show we talked about aeroplanes in the war that were, you know, potentially using subsonic frequencies to create death. Again, probably just part of the propaganda, but it's done with death and sex. So a nice easy example for any flat earthers out there is the 2005 Blue Marble remake, composite, whatever. And if you flip the globe upside down, you've got the word sex, you know, very, very subtly put in. And I'll finally get to my point there, Antonio, so you can jump in. But yesterday we talked about Disney, and the way that Disney will make it that much more or that much less subtle. In other words, they almost promote the way they subliminally program us with things like the SFX debacle, or whatever you want to, you know, the idea that SFX, the studio that did the special effects for The Lion King, had just hidden their name into Simba lying down and the cloud of smoke that went up into the clouds and created the word sex. Now, the debate whether or not it's SFX or SEX is kind of irrelevant, because they're just highlighting the fact that they program us subliminally. And Disney seem to like telling us that they do this, or they won't try and gag anybody who's letting this information out. And it continues to happen to this day. I know Nathan Bell does a really, really good job of exposing, and 90% of what he does is probably Disney that he'll show. But yeah, that's a chemical and auditorial reaction that is certainly well documented in terms of our hi-fi perception, but that's a really small line to it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. And also, excuse me, if you think about it, we have the apparently subliminal images in cartoons, in TV, and they're not really subliminal. If they were, nobody would have really picked up on them. So that's like the hiding in plain sight. Please don't notice this thing that we're highlighting. You know, it's like, yeah, that's done.
Exactly. Please don't notice this. It's a secret.
Yes. Here's us doing the Baphomet sign. All those images. It's with the sex in the cartoons, the sexual imagery and sexual wording in various different things. For those of us who are awake, that's a primer. So we watch, we think, oh, and our mind becomes alert to that. And part of the reason it's done is that because when our mind becomes alert to something, that's the point at which subliminal things come in. It's distraction. We don't notice the undertone, or we might not notice the words that are actually being said because we're visually distracted, and our inner dialogue kicks in, and inner dialogue speaks louder than the external world. So that's just something that happens with normal, natural human beings. You have to have kind of training to learn how to switch off your inner dialogue, to take in information, to then assess it along with your inner dialogue at later points. This is kind of part of the training at universities. It's like you have to switch your inner dialogue off, otherwise you won't absorb what the lecturer is talking about. And this visual thing is the same kind of thing, but for a wider, much wider audience. So you have the targeting. You might notice it when you're viewing it first time. When you notice it, that's the point at which subliminals enter. The subliminals can be as simple as something that's just inferred. It doesn't have to be something programmed into the structure of whatever is being used with you, used on you. So it doesn't have to be something that's implicit in the film or the cartoon. It can be basically just an idea that has been slowly woven, like with neurolinguistic programming, a keyword here, a key image there, something that doesn't become consolidated, that doesn't enter your subliminal consciousness until the point that you receive this distraction. At that point, those keywords filter in, because the combination of imaging, of background, of environment, all of those things play a role in the appropriate time for you to receive a certain subliminal. The magician does this with the flare. So if he doesn't do the flare, he can't do the trick. So he does the flare. So some of these supposedly subliminal images are the flare that is allowing the consolidation of true subliminals to have an impact on you, which is to raise the alarm, to basically to lower your vibration, to cause your vibration to be more prone to reacting without thought, which is fear. This is the whole image, the whole idea of fear. So yeah, the various different combinations and tactics that are used. We had, not so long ago, everybody was walking around with skulls on their T-shirts. I didn't, and I wouldn't allow anybody that I had an influence on to do so, because I was just explaining to them what this symbol means, what it represents. Now, we used to have the poison symbol on bleach, on various different things that could kill you. Used to be a skull with a cross. It said death, poison, So you've taken off the cross and just put the skull, which means death. The skull represents directly human death, not just death in general, but human death. And everybody walking around with scarves, with death skulls, all of this. And people saying, oh, it's just a fad. It's nothing. There's nothing malevolent behind it. It's nothing insidious or no. There is something insipid and insidious in it. That people assume that it's just a gimmick, that it was designed by somebody and people liked it, and all of that is just rationalization for the fact that people were walking around with skulls all the time. It's just rationalization, and people do the same with the sex and SFX. People will rationalize that, no, it's not really sex, it's SFX. It's not really for distracting you so that subliminals can consolidate. It's just a joke. People will rationalize. You mentioned this yesterday with the X-Files, where there would be an element in the X-Files, or it was something else, but there'd be an element of, oh yeah, it was with the NASA thing that you said, where somebody walks into Stanley Kubrick filming the lunar landing. And then
the Coast of London. Can I just explain what that is? Because there may be people who've not seen it.
Yes.
Okay, so this spans from a conversation, one of my first interviews with Matrix Decode, and at the time they'd released on Channel 4 a episode of a show called Toast. Now, Toast is basically a voiceover artist and actor, and I won't go through the full plot of this particular episode, but the key details were he's explaining to his agent that he's just done a talk show, a morning breakfast talk show. It doesn't get a huge amount of viewers, but it's a television show. And during the talk show, he has let slip that he met Stanley Kubrick. And he explains to his agent that the circumstances under which he met Kubrick were he had smoked a bit too much wacky backy, gone into the wrong studio, and then seen the moon landing set. So he sees them faking the moon landings. And he's then pinned up against the wall by Stanley Kubrick and told, if you tell a soul about this, we'll hunt you down and erase you from the world. And he then looks over and sees Richard Nixon. So then the wavy lines come and he's back in the scene with his agent, and she says the information that you've let out has the potential to end civilization as we know it and the world. Now, as the show progresses, the CIA get involved and hunt them all down and kill them, or so they think. They accidentally kill the wrong man. But yes, they've got the idea of that show isn't to hide the truth of the moon landings and Kubrick's fakery in plain sight. It's quite the opposite. The idea is that once you see that and someone presents you with the notion that you have had fake moon landings, the person who's seen that show can say, you just got that from the TV. That's just an episode of Toast. It's a nonsense. In other words, it's extremely clever reverse predictive programming. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it, but there you go. That's the Toast episode.
Yes, and this is the similar things in the X-Files, where the X-Files, I don't know if many viewers watched the original series of the X-Files, but in the original series of the X-Files, there's maybe it's the third or fourth episode, they mention HAARP. They discuss how up in Alaska they have an antenna array that shoots lightning into the sky. Now, this is in the original X-Files. So anybody later on mentioning an array of antennas that shoots electricity into the sky, somebody else can say, oh, that was just sci-fi. That was just the X-Files. And it's the same with what you just mentioned. Somebody can just discard it and say, no, that was just a show. It was a joke. You've got the wrong end of the stick. And it's basically... But
it works both ways. So when you have things like the Avengers, although it's kind of based on Earth, they've got people like Thor coming from different dimensions, and a lot of the problems are solved with modern theoretical physics. So they will drop some quite complex terms that use string theory or parallel universes or whatever into the plots of movies like the Avengers, and it's set against the suspension of disbelief, but it softens us up to these ideas. If we've seen gods come through dimensions from other parts of space, that whole idea visually reinforces the globe. But while they explain about parallel universes or whatever they're currently studying, so that it's easily accepted when you have Brian Cox or Dara O'Brien or whoever, Neil deGrasse, whoever presenting this information as new discoveries, when in reality you've had it 5 years ago on a cartoon or on a movie.
Yes, sorry, I just something went wrong with my computer over here. Yes, so you have elements in fantasy propping up other elements in fantasy which are dressed as truth. So certain elements of fantasy, like wormholes, like things that are theoretically possible, which are actually verbalized as theoretically possible. Now, the idea of something being theoretically possible is not synonymous with something being possible, which is why they put the word theoretically in there. Now, if something is possible, it's possible. It's not, it would be, if we consider the word theoretical to mean in a fantasy world, so fantastically, It's fantastically possible. Oh, fine. Everybody would know that it's just an idea, it's just a thought, but it's worded in such a way by characters who are endorsed by the system, the whole education deferring to authority system, as having knowledge that is specialized. And when they word things like theoretically possible, we then wonder if this theory will ever become reality, because we know, or at least some of us, that the world of physics has two different sides. In the Big Bang Theory, for instance, a TV show that many people might have watched, you have the experimental physicist, played by Leonard, who does real physical physics. And then you have sorry, I need to switch this off. And then you have the theoretical physicist, who only works with ideas and notions. Then what happens in the original world of physics, the standard bona fide legitimate science, you have people studying phenomena and then trying to figure out what that phenomena is, what that phenomena is a manifestation of. That's how it works. Not somebody conjuring up a possible phenomena explanation and then looking to see if the world can find it. And that's what we have right now. We've got a complete polar flipping, excuse the pun, of the actual valid science. The valid science says, this is what we're experiencing. This is the actual data from what we're really experiencing. And then it's supposed to be, apparently, passed over to the theorists. The theorists aren't actually necessary. The physicists themselves know the theories, and they can, between themselves, discover what's what. But you have this extra branch of theoretical physics, which basically conjures up ideas and then thinks of ways of having experimental physicists prove or disprove those ideas. And what usually happens is it goes nowhere. And we see from Sasha Orphan Red pointed this out, you have this false data inserted into instrumentation, so that the whole idea that theoretical physics is going to be proven by experimental physics is now completely debunked, because the data itself is false. It's raw data. Raw data does not mean data that has not been manipulated from observations of a phenomenon. It means invented data. Otherwise, they will simply use the word data. The use of words that we know that the use of words is being corrupted. We have wicked to mean great, and all of these things. In the world of art, we have modern art. Art doesn't need a qualifier. It doesn't need a word before to explain. It's just art. Now, if there's a word that's kind of saying this is special art, then chances are it's talking nonsense. I almost swore then. I'm being very careful not to. When you have qualifiers of things that on their own have a completely bona fide and legitimate explanation, like the word conspiracy, when you have a qualifier, you're basically looking at a nonsense term. So raw data is a nonsense term, like conspiracy theorist is a nonsense term, and modern art is a nonsense term. So
also, the problem is the way the data is actually presented. In most cases, not necessarily the data itself that's obviously fallible to a degree, but the data presentation is what we get. So I'll just think of a quick example. CERN, about 18 months ago, had shape-shifting neutrinos and breaking the speed of light, and it was heavily publicized that they'd proven Newton wrong. And then maybe 12 months later, maybe 6 months ago, they went back and said, actually, we'd got an incorrect measurement. Here are the new measurements. And that was kind of brushed under the carpet. But the bit that made the headlines was Newton was right all along. Now, in that case, you've got two conflicting sets of data, the first being passed off as a malfunction with measuring equipment. Now, bearing in mind with CERN, you've got them telling us constantly how accurate and how fantastic these machines are with non-stop pictures of the machines itself. And then when we get a measurement that contradicts some of the standardized science that's out there, it's then passed off as a mistake, passed off as an error. But we don't know that that's the case. We don't know that that's accurate in the first instance and then found to be wrong, or inaccurate in the first instance and then corrected. We've got no way of telling, because the only means of receiving this information isn't standing in front of the equipment and doing the test. It's just the media's presentation of that information. And that's the key. It's kind of irrelevant. We're never going to know how accurate it is because of the spin. The spin comes from the media.
Yes, we have exactly the same thing with Eratosthenes. We have this character
probably inserted into the history books.
Yes, well, if you look, it goes back to what we were originally saying about 1984 and everything becoming electric. So electrical interfaces with knowledge or with banks of information. So, and we still have books. So you can alter something very quickly on the internet. You can alter documents, you can disappear documents, and you can insert documents. And the same can be done in history, as long as you have access to the books. So once a book no longer exists, you can then recreate that book and say various different things about it. So there are books that describing the lives, that are explaining and describing the lives of the Greeks of the era of Eratosthenes. The same era when Eratosthenes is supposed to have worked out the curvature of the Earth. This is the era around, well, after Pythagoras, after in the era of between 2,000 years before Christ and 500 years before Christ, and current era. Now, there's no mention of Eratosthenes, and people can rationalize that the reason for that is that he was not a philosopher. But they forget that back then, there was no distinction between philosopher and mathematician. Mathematics was one of the natural sciences, one of the natural philosophies. So to assume that this character existed, all records of whom were destroyed, but somehow salvaged and somehow recreated, is basically, it's asking for belief. If you endorse this, if you believe this, you're just believing what somebody is saying. Now, there are other ways of verifying whether something is true or not in history, in terms of the paper trail. So Plato did exist. It's not a question that he was planted. Socrates existed. Thales existed. All of the great Greek philosophers who existed, we can verify existed by various different things. With people who have been planted, we can't verify that they existed. We can only really logically conclude that they didn't, that they were just thrown into the pot. There's a rationalization for conclusions later on. So we have, for instance, Newton and the use of language and the use of apparent historical figures. I haven't read anything, I haven't come across anything where Newton talks about Eratosthenes. There might be some record somewhere, but I haven't read it. And that's curious, but maybe Copernicus mentioned him, who knows? But the point is, when you're looking at words and historical figures and names, things can be warped and twisted. Now, when you think of Newton's gravity, okay, now this might be a little bit rambly. You have Newton developing gravity. The word gravity already existed. It still exists today, and some people who have very eloquent speech will use it. It means seriousness. It means it means something to be taken serious. No, not something to be taken seriously. It means something of imperative importance. It's crucial. Gravity, seriousness. Say again?
Gravitas.
Gravitas. Yes, something that has serious implications. The main thing is serious. Okay? Now, he chose the word gravity to explain something that already had a philosophical explanation, which is a scientific explanation. We have to not forget that the sciences were originally the result of philosophy. The study of knowledge is what science is trying to do, and that's what philosophy is. So we have this word used to explain something that already had an explanation. Consistency, density, and buoyancy, it already had an explanation. Now, going back to the historical record and distortion, you know the story of Archimedes running around the streets shouting Eureka. Yeah?
Sure.
The
Bathwater was too hot.
Say again?
Bathwater was too hot.
Yes, yes. So the story is that he was basically ordered to develop a way of figuring out whether the king's gold was being stolen by the goldsmith. And he, in the bath, realized that gold has a certain density and a certain volume, which would cause a certain displacement. Okay? Now, this is what we've just been told, and we accept it. It makes sense. What if what was actually happening was not only that, but also Archimedes, who's not likely to have been the kind of person who just thought one thought at a time, the same as Tesla, the kind of person that could think various different thoughts at the same time. What if he was running around because he would and shouting, "I've got it, I have it, I figured it out, Eureka," because he had figured out the fundamentals of density that preceded him. The fundamentals, because people were saying, but how can we describe this? How can we describe heaviness? So he is in the bath and he's just figured out how he can describe, how he can contribute to the explanation of our world, which has an explanation of how things float, how things fall, how things remain in place. This is more likely than merely a threat that if you don't figure out whether or not my gold is being stolen, that doesn't make sense. It must have been something much more fundamental. And I mean, this is just my conclusion, and I am a conspiracist. I think that part of the equation has just been left out of the history books because it confirms Aristotle and the Greek philosophers, it confirms their findings on the natural world. But it undoes Newton's findings of the fantasy world because he has walked the real world and converted things into gravity to explain the fantasy world of spheres in space and spin and orbits. So it's just that part of Archimedes' discovery has just been excised.
I mean, the three words that I wrote down at the end of our conversation yesterday in prep for this show was beliefs, fantasies, and illusions.
Oh, yes, yes. This is this might, because of the nature of what we're going to discuss now, it might at first seem that we're endorsing something. We're not. We're explaining, trying to explain something that is important for all of us to understand so that we can, first of all, look at the system, look at the psychological, mental systems that need to be destabilized and eventually deconstructed, demolished. And this is the system of belief and illusion and fantasy, because we know we were under a delusion, we were under the illusion that the fantasy of spheres was a bona fide, justified belief. We know this because we did believe it. Right now, we know that there are Luciferians or Satanists, child molesters, dark, bad people, evil people, and we know that there are explanations of the mechanisms that they're engaged with. Call that Satan, archons, energy forms, whatever you want to call. Now, those things are fantasy and illusion to create a belief. So the people who worship Satan and who do horrible things, the reason they do those things is their belief system requires it for whatever reason or rewards them. And that belief is reinforced to those Satanists because they get a sense of power because of a confirmation bias, basically. So with the bad guys, the guys who sign legislation to allow fracking and therefore poisoning of natural water systems, these guys, their belief system is rationalized by them. So the people in the Bohemian Grove, their belief system, they really believe that they are superior, that they do have the right to cremate care, that they have the right to live without concern. Now, we know that they have this ceremony. We know that Satanists are Satanists. We know that bad people, that psychopaths are psychopaths, and they all do it because it pleases them. So you'll have the religious psychopaths who do things because it pleases them to please the avatar they worship, who doesn't exist, but they have this feedback from the world that they have woven around them. And there will be hierarchical systems in that, where you have the people creating the fantasies, developing the systems for illusion to give the impression that the fantasy is true, and therefore build, construct, and support the belief of the bad guys. Now, we have to understand this if we're going to ever get to the point where we can deconstruct and start to demolish those beliefs. We have to understand this. Otherwise, we're going to be continuously running, we're going to be a continuous tide against another tide, or a continuous tide against the cliff. We have to understand how the tide can corrode the cliff so that the cliff stops being a cliff. That's my little analogy, but it's important.
I mean, you can give maybe a bit more detail. If I give the nice example, because there's going to be a lot of people who are flat earthers watching this show, just so that they can wrap it round. So if I give the example using the globe, can you then use a similar example using Satan worship? So you've got the belief system, which is what they're trying to construct, the belief system being the globe. And they do this with a generous dose of fantasy. So you have the fantasy system in the suspensions of disbelief, our movies and our drama series. Again, I use the example of the Avengers. So they've got that set against the backdrop of space and space travel and all the rest of it. And that ultimately leads to the illusion part, which is where NASA comes in, where they have the smoke and the mirrors and the rockets going up. And that is the illusion which firmly seats your belief in the globe. So you have these different elements. This is a very crude and simplistic way of describing it, but that process enables you to establish a belief as a fact. It's been reinforced. Your mind's been softened to it before you've been given the idea in the first place. Then you've been given the idea as proof with smoke and mirrors, and that's the circle complete. Can you give us a similar example where they do the same process with Satan worship?
Yes. If you take the things that you just said and you qualify them as tokens. Okay, so you have the token of illusion. For that token of illusion, you have various other tokens. So you have images and explanations, okay? And those are the tokens for the illusion. So with the globe, we have images of the globe. With Satanists, we have images of Satan, literal images, drawings, paintings, statues. These things are to prop the belief. These things are to culminate in a belief, but these are the structures by which the belief is created. So you have the fantasy, which is basically the conjuring up of ideas. Then you have the illusion, which is the creating forms, shapes, literary works, music, sounds, images that correspond to the fantasy, like in The Lord of the Rings. So you have tokens that are the same tokens for the whole of the globe theory as for the whole of Satan worship or the whole of any other belief that is not justified. All the beliefs that are not justified are beliefs of things you cannot test. This is the biggest, the most formidable truth for the flat earth, that we can test it. The globe, they can't, so they have to invent images and icons. And for Satan worship, for Luciferian, it's the same thing. It's images, it's words, it's illusion, then confirmation bias. So if a Luciferian person says, Lucifer, find me a great parking spot, and they drive to town and there's a great parking spot, they've just confirmed to themselves that Lucifer has helped them find that parking spot. Now, let's say somebody who worships Jesus says, Jesus, please find me a parking spot so that I can be more successful. Same thing. Somebody who worships anything, somebody who uses the secret, it's the same thing, okay? Now, how the parking spot gets there, is it intent molding the world and creating a coincidence type run of parking spots or things that you can give thanks to the secret or the universe to? Is that what happens? But other people misalign the thanks and aim it in the wrong way? I think maybe, we don't know. But the Lucifer exists because you found the parking spot. It's not actually real. And the whole globe myth is woven exactly the same as any other fantasy, which is blended into the real world. So let's move from Satan worship to Zeus and Apollo and those gods. It's exactly the same thing. You have an idea, you have imagery, then you have people confirming their beliefs by telling stories. I asked Zeus to get me out of this situation, and I got out of the situation. And it's all just confirmation bias based on your beliefs. And it's beliefs of things that cannot be directly tested in a physical way. It's always a mental conclusion. Zeus must have found me the parking spot, or Odin must have banished the ice giants. It's always just something that you have to believe. And if you have to believe something and you don't, there's no way for you to truly test it physically and really demonstrate it, then we're in the same field as the Satan worshippers and the globe worshippers. It's the same thing. And this is what makes the flat earth different, that we don't. We can physically test, we can physically observe. And that's why the globalists and some of the believers of other things hate about the flat earth. They hate that. We can demonstrate it. So they make up lies to say, no, what you're noticing is what we're saying. It's like, no, what you're saying is all fabrication. I had a conversation with my cousin who's a pilot. We're talking about the curve, the recent video that P-Brain showed. I think it was P-Brain, with the zooming in of the horizon and the it might not be P-Brain, but anyway, these islands that are at the horizon with a camera that's 3 foot high, and then he moves the camera 500 meters high, and then he moves the camera to sea level, to where maybe an inch or two from the actual sea level, and the things are still there. The islands are still there. Now, my cousin, who's a globalist, says inversion. And I've explained to him inversion means either inside out or upside down. It doesn't mean something else, okay? So either what he's saying is that the islands we're seeing are inside out, which is nonsensical, or they're upside down. and they're not upside down. And the idea that inversion might refer to upside downness of some other type is a nonsense, because gas is not upside down. Atmospheric conditions are not upside down. They are however they are. So it's referring to the light moving from that point to this point. And this is a practical experimental physics, a real physics observation of refraction. We do have refraction. Distance on a plane causes refraction. So we have mirages, we have objects disappearing towards the bottom, or to do with line of sight and perspective, and atmospheric conditions. Now there's refraction, but refraction doesn't explain seeing things which we shouldn't be able to see because the curve has interrupted our line of sight. So they embellish and they create this inversion. Now inversion is a natural process of refraction, but to say that it somehow works beyond the curve and doesn't flip the image is a straightforward falsehood. It's incorrect. It is not true. And experimental physicists can test this and prove it and do, and flat earthers can do exactly the same thing. The proofs that we're looking for, the real uncontestable proofs, will come from experimental physicists. Now, some of them would be flat earthers, but some of them won't. Some of them are literally studying the world we live on, and they don't have any bias. They just want to know what's what, a bit like CD. He wants to know what's what. Not, actually, it might even be better to not have any kind of bias anyway, because then we would look for we would find confirmation of that bias.
I think CD and Crow 777 have both been very clever in their presentation. I know Crow will certainly confess to having a close look at the flat Earth model, but he doesn't profess to be anything. He's just looking and studying. And I really want to prop up guys like that. They get a lot of stick as well, especially Crow. But these are the guys that, to use CD's words, are taking back space and actually making these real observations. I'll come back to Crow and CD if that's okay with you, Antonio. But I was going to, before we left that last topic, talk about the way that the propaganda surrounding flat Earth, which is possibly being overlooked and labelled incorrectly. I'm not going to go into shills and trolls and all the rest of it, but just one of those sort of measures that they use, which is in the complete opposition to what you've just described, which is the physical observations, the literal looking and seeing and testing in that way, is diverted, or at least has been. Perhaps it's coming to an end now, but has been in the last few months with models. So you've got the globe model, which is the thing that everyone picks to pieces and says doesn't work. And certainly John Le Bon would say, well, there's things in the flat Earth model that do not work. And that may very well be deliberate. I've got no proof of this, but we certainly have a high level of suspicion that the azimuthal equidistant projection, which is not a map, it works from the center out. It's never going to be an accurate representation from that point of view. But you have people saying, well, here's your model with the sun and the moon going above it. It doesn't work for reasons of, equatorial sundials, not showing any difference and things of this nature. But you're looking at the model. In other words, you're trying to figure out ways that the let's call it 5 years, if we're generous, that the flat earthers have had to figure out where we actually live versus the 500 years of modelling that comes out to the same place. In other words, if you exclusively look at the model, which traps us into the iPad, traps us into the PC and the TV world, if we do this, because it's in opposition to what you've just said. It's not the going out and saying, well, these islands aren't miles and miles below curvature. We don't see any curve when we rise up, even if they were hidden behind curvature. It's never exacerbated. But that's not the way that the debates seem to roll. It's all about the models and the maps. And that isn't really what flat Earth is all about. It's about reality. It's never going to change what we go out and see and can test. even if our models, if every single one of them was completely arse about face and never worked at all, it wouldn't change what we see. It wouldn't change that example you gave with the islands. It wouldn't change the buoys and boats that come back into view when you use a zoom camera. All of those things will always remain.
Yes. Sorry, I'm making a correction. I think it was Flat Earth Hub that had the video that I was discussing.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Okay, here's a thought to contemplate. So we have the globalists talking about a model. Their model doesn't work, but they say it does because they say, oh, look, we predicted the eclipse. So, okay, eclipses were predicted way before Copernicus. So no, we predicted what the eclipse was going to be. Same thing. The eclipses were predicted way before. So, and the accusation that we don't have a working model, they don't have a working model. We know that their model doesn't work. We know that the phases of the moon and its proximity to the sun, that it doesn't work. So when we're responding to their accusation of a working model, which they developed through a hierarchical authority system, believing other people's results, and then looking at the world through those beliefs, we have to tread carefully that we don't also endorse authority of certain flat earthers or certain skeptics. We don't have to endorse. We can observe what they say. We can look to verify or disprove, but not just wholeheartedly embrace a model, whatever the model is. Eventually, I think that this flat earth, this resurfacing of the flat earth is indicative that we are the generation of the stage of man that will arrive at that conclusion. The other ancient civilizations didn't arrive at a conclusion of truth. They had the chariot, the sun being pulled on a chariot, or everything growing out of a god's belly button.
Pushed by a dung beetle through the sky.
Yes, all kinds of things. And the Bible repeats some of the bona fide description, but then includes its own fantasy and illusion into the number of days. Nobody can verify how many days. There was no direct dialogue between God and a human's consciousness where God was explaining to that human the stages that happened. It's all just a human representation of what might have happened. Okay, and we shouldn't put belief on some human's interpretation of what might have happened. We should not.
That's a nice segue back into CD and Crow 777, because they're not basing it on models or beliefs. They're simply making non-stop observations.
Yes, now the observations are valid, and this is where I'm saying we don't have to embrace any model that anybody develops. Whether it's with a map, whether it's with anything, all that we can really do is observe. If people create models, we can observe and we can question and pick apart or endorse, but to wholeheartedly embrace as being absolutely correct, we are falling into the same system that the globalists fell into, which is believing. So none of us are going to really be able to verify by going high up from the earth and looking at the shape of the layout of the continents. None of us as a physical being is really going to be able to do that. NASA can't do it.
We touched upon this a little bit earlier, actually, Antonio, and you went over it quite quickly, which was the moon not being lit by the axis of the sun, and you brushed over it. Can you? I know you go into a lot of detail on a lot of your videos about this subject, but this is something we can observe. This is something we can look at from our point of view.
Yes, and this is something that completely undoes the globe model, like 100%. I haven't got a drawing that I can show, but
you can just verbalize it. I mean, it's good if you do verbalize it, because it's something that we can literally go out and just have a quick check. I mean, if the sun was out my window, I'd probably see it right now.
Yes. So anybody out there, look for the moon in a daytime sky. Okay, that's all you need. You need to have a moon. It doesn't matter what phase in the daytime sky, which means the sun is there, not dawn or dusk, where the sun has disappeared and you can't directly point your finger at it. It has to be within your line of sight. When you have the two luminaries in the sky and you draw a straight line from the sun to the moon, from your perspective, it doesn't matter where you are on the earth. The line of light between the sun and the moon should always be, if one is being lit by the other, perpendicular. That's to say, if we have this shape, if this is the crescent of the moon, it should be perpendicular. If it's a gibbous moon, it should be perpendicular. There is no logical explanation for it being offline. And when you look at the crescent of the moon and you see that the sun is in this direction, but the moon is not lit here, but lit there, when the angle of approach of sunlight tells us the sun is not lighting the moon. And you can see this with it doesn't matter what moon it is, what face of the moon it is, all you need to see is that it's daytime, that you have the sun in one place in the sky and the moon in another. The only time that you can't really confirm this inappropriate angle is a full moon. When you have a full moon in the daytime, you can't tell this discrepancy. But any other phase, and you can see this discrepancy, the sun lighting the moon from an angle that's other than perpendicular to the center of the illuminated area. So if we're talking about the sliver, we're talking to the center of the sliver, not the center of what we assume might be the face of the earth on the other side. The center of the sliver. It doesn't matter if the moon was round on the other side and the other side was being lit, it would still have to be lit at a perpendicular degree, the perpendicular angle to the sun, not from some off-kilter angle, okay? Now, when you see this yourself, you will have 100% proof that the orbit is false, completely false, and that the flat Earth model of the sun making its cycles around the sun, if you think that the moon is being lit by the sun, you have to scrap the idea that the moon is lit by the sun. You have to scrap that idea. You can still have the same. Rob Skiba made a great model of the moon and sun and the seasons, but the moon receiving its light from the sun is not what's happening. 100%, it's impossible. You cannot light a sphere with another sphere from the wrong angle unless you've got reflection and something occluding the light at some other point. It's not logical. So
I mean, one of the things again that we talked about yesterday was the potential for distress when people brace against the notion that we could have been lied to in such a massive amount. And I know we were also talking about this in terms of the new discoveries and the excitement this gives people like you and I, and bringing it back to people like Crow and CD. They're actually presenting us with some really quite fantastic observations that are very much in contradiction to what we get shown from NASA, certainly in the case of the planets that they're showing. But when it comes to the moon, you've got images that you can go out and get yourself. You know, I know there's been a massive advertising campaign for telescopes by John Lewis in the UK over last Christmas, but you can get these similar quality of images just by looking yourself. And it's nothing like the quality that we're handed with the illusions and the smoke and mirrors from NASA. And it's nice to have that ability from channels like those guys to just go and tune into it and actually have a little look for yourself without having any equipment. You know, I know certainly CD is streaming this stuff live, you know, and he's got it down to fine art, shots that on a manual cheap telescope like I've got, it would take me an hour of setting up and trying to track something in the sky, and he can get it in mere seconds. You know, he's got such good muscle memory to do this, and you can literally tune into one of his broadcasts, and it really opens your eyes to what is up there and how it's presented when you just have a look at it, and detach yourself from the fantasy and detach yourself from the smoke and mirrors that we're presented with on a daily basis. But the bit I want to bring this back to is how you and I and certain others will experience a lot of joy for knowing that there's a world of possibility out there. But the rhetorics of the world will not. They will cling on to their beliefs as a way of having knowledge, or having or being better as a person for having this underlying knowledge, which is the common knowledge anyway. And it's just so alien to me to not see the possibilities and the excitement. What's your feelings on that, Antonio?
My feelings on that, I'll respond to the how we feel a sense of excitement and interest versus the egotistic, I know everything to do with astronomy, with the illusion, and therefore I'm better than you because I've retained more details. So I'll address that on the one side, but first the sense of wonder that we see the world with. We see that there are so many mysteries that are still to be either appreciated as mysteries, and the appreciation of those mysteries might cue certain ideas about the nature of existence, which bring us joy, whether those ideas are verifiable or not. That there's a mystery, that the whole of our existence was created. That's a great mystery. So the specific mystery to do with the sun and the moon. What is the moon? How does it take in heat? How does it cast down cold? How does it cast down light that doesn't illuminate color? How do these things happen? All of those mysteries, they're great mysteries. They are great mental exercises for discovering truth, because all truth is discovered through inquiry. So they are it's a phenomenal world where there are all of these things which we thought had been discovered and explained, and they haven't at all been discovered and explained. They have just been glossed over with a lie. The truth is still there, and whether we arrive at it or not, I happen to think that this epoch of man will be the epoch that arrives at true verifiable knowledge, and eventually the whole idea of a utopian, a literally utopian future existence of mankind. And at that point, who knows what the ... is at the end. No idea, but I'm convinced, because we have the tools, the know-how, the equipment, the connection, and the information sharing that I'm assuming they didn't in the ancient days. So this is why they could come to some very valid observations, but had to embellish on the things behind the scenes because they had no way of verifying. So
when you say embellish, do you mean based on preconceived notions?
Based on either preconceived notions or, like we said before, on fantasy, on I think it's archons that make this happen. You know, if you look at the globe, if you really study the globe and you ask key questions like where's the freaking curve, just certain key questions demonstrate that the globe is not true. So go into the archons, and I know that some people really accept the possibility of archons. Ask key questions. What are they? What's an archon's portal to existence? Is it in a different dimension that's somehow exempt from God's remit and bypasses the whole God area to exist? Do they have a mummy and daddy? Do they grow? Or are they the result of some quirky mathematical equation or a mathematical-like equation? Is that what archons are? Or are they merely an expression of our inability to understand things, which we patch up with archons, the same way as the globalists patched up with the globe? I tend to lean on the, well, this doesn't make sense, that's implausible, these things do not make sense, therefore it's an invention, it is a fantasy. And then there are the illusion, the weaving of that fantasy, and the icons, the Aztec, who inherited the world of the Maya and the knowledge from the Maya. The Aztec, they developed the archons. They had archons. They had these angels, the type of angels, and these anti-angels. These guys who loved goodness and happiness, and these guys who loved dread and fear and pain and suffering. And it was all, life was all a case of appeasing the two. And this, it's all just not understanding, not having the verifiable, provable understanding of truth. So they embellish, they create, they concoct, they invent, they fantasize, they then weave an illusion, they then create a belief, and then they have that belief confirmed through their bias. So that
just reminded me of something which isn't necessarily on this topic, but it has a nice example of that. And I made a video about this recently, which was about dinosaur bones. And we chatted about this some time ago, but about a particular circular argument. I'm not going to steal your thunder. You take over. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes, it's not my thunder. It was, I think it was Stars Are Souls, a black guy who was cool, but he's gone quiet. I think he pulled everything down. It was really a passionate guy.
I was talking to Patricia Steer about him, and she was saying that he didn't like the nastiness within the flat earth videos and just took a step back. He hasn't changed his stance at all. He's just taken a bit of a step back, and frankly, who can blame him?
Yes, I don't think that he's taken a step. I don't think that he's wiped his hands of everything. I don't think that he's forsaken all of the truths. I don't think that at all. I think whatever he's doing, good on him. If he's finding his happiness, brilliant. But what he said, he went to a place where they were exhibiting dinosaur bones, and then he asked, how are the dinosaur bones dated, given that carbon-14 dating is limited to only a few hundred years, not millions of years? And the answer was, they're dated by the layer of rock in which they're found. And he then said, and how's the layer of rock? I'm paraphrasing. He then said, well, how's the layer of rock dated, given the carbon dating doesn't work on those rocks? And it was by the dinosaur bones that are found in it. So it's a circular argument. The rock is dated by the bones found in it, and the bones are dated by the rock layer they're found in. And basically, it's just a big question mark. It was a good way of highlighting the pataphysics of the explanations that were given as bona fide, legitimate explanations. They're not. Usually, they're pataphysics. They're just made up, sound as if they're actually responding to the subject, but when you question them further, they don't. The same as certain beliefs. If you question it, when I was a teenager, okay, we would have chats, me and my friends, and this whole idea of Lucifer and the Satan and God is like, there's all the questions. Why would God make Lucifer? All those questions. But I used to always say, well, Luciferians must accept that there's a superior to their Lucifer. The guy that made Lucifer has got to be superior. Why go with the inferior? And I understand the philosophy between Luciferianism, which they say is, oh, no, Lucifer is actually the good guy. God is the oppressor. It's like, no, all of those things are just anthropomorphizing an intelligent energy that has the ability to create. That's all that's doing. And it's anthropomorphizing suffering. You're saying, suffering comes from this character that has this look. I love this idea that the energy that is God, that people refer to as God, I refer to as a great mystery, just because it is a mystery. That energy has resonant ability, has waveform has electricity, has certain qualities to it, the ability to create. Does that energy form also have a beard? No, it doesn't. It doesn't have a beard, and it doesn't have a mummy and daddy. This is us anthropomorphizing an energy form. It's absurd that it begets children. No. All of that is just conjuring up ideas, okay? And I know that this is offensive to some people, and as you can see, I don't wish to offend anybody. And I said before, I can see how the intelligent energy might make use of an avatar that might have been created for nefarious reasons and make use of it for positive reasons, because it can do whatever it wants. But so that lets, I don't know, that makes the idea of Jesus as the avatar of goodness bona fide. So, you know, that's fine. Going back to the question of red rhetoric and the belief in the globe and the flat earthers and their wonder at the mysteries, okay? We have, and this is almost like we're, you know, applauding ourselves. It's not, we've gone back to the childlike wonder that we had stolen when we were told that we live on a globe. So we didn't go and inquire and make our own personal observations, which we could then compile and start to describe the real world. Like, for instance, Da Vinci. Da Vinci was making real observations of the world because he wasn't told that these things had been figured out. He was making observations. He was learning continuously. And he made some wonderful observations of the real world, of shadow and how shadow works on light and on color and various different things. But with people like Red's rhetoric, and we will have seen this with a lot of trolls, they will make an assertion that's complete nonsense, that we know it's nonsense, but we also know that they feel this sense of, they make an assertion that they assume is valid, and then they pat themselves on the back. Ha, I told that flat earther. When the flat earther comes back to them and says, what about Kirchhoff's law of thermal radiation and the ISS? How come the ISS isn't completely pulverized and disintegrated in its most fundamental form? Then they rebel. What is this? So we don't go around thinking, wow, there's so much to discover about the moon. Pat on the back. You're a great guy for wondering that and for noticing. And we don't do that. We're just absorbed in the interest and the wonder. And people like Red Rhetoric embrace the idea that they have superiority, superior knowledge, superior understanding. And this is like a shield that is used by people who don't want to contemplate the possibility that their inner thoughts, their inner dialogue, their ideas, their observations, their judgments of the world and their interaction with it might have much deeper repercussions than they assume. Because the whole Big Bang resulting in the globe and individuated human beings says there's chaos, which orders itself, but still chaos. And you, an individual private being, and when you're gone, you either go to some creator feedback loop, or you're just gone. And your actions had no repercussions other than the immediate repercussions that you experienced. So your gain or your suffering. Are you okay, Nathan?
Yeah, no, your picture just went for a moment. That, and I was paying attention to the comments. A lot of people were saying about Red Rhetoric in the comments that he's just a drama queen, basically, and he's just thriving on the negative attention. I mean, he is. What would you respond? How would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond that when somebody's in a situation where they're alarmed because they are their world is being demolished, their response is legitimate. It's a legitimate response. I don't think that they're thinking, I'm going to talk in a higher pitch with a deeper sense of urgency to give an illusion. And I know that drama queens do legitimately feel the drama that they're exhibiting. The diva situation, I would call him a diva more than a drama queen. And I know that they're kind of the same thing, but the diva requires things be brought to them, whereas the drama queen can be quite, somebody can be a drama queen by being quite quiet and, you know, martyr-like and, oh, poor it's me, but that they're still being a drama queen. He's being a diva, and it, you know, good luck to him if that's what he wants to do. But eventually, the fundamental reason for him being like this is that his world, which props up his illusion that his actions don't have the ramifications that flat earthers understand our actions have, because we understand our source is not an accidental mechanistic result of physical laws established at the Big Bang. We know our source is, to use a religious term, divine. We know this. We know the whole world is divine. We know all the other beings in it are divine. They are, all of them, created by the same thing in the same way. And somebody's actions, like his, tell me that he is alarmed. He doesn't want to face the possibility that he has to write off all of his knowledge and start from afresh at the same point as the other amateurs, like we flat earthers. We're all amateurs on the flat earth, and he doesn't want to join the amateur club in anything. This is the kind of guy who and this is just me assuming, and I might be casting aspersions. There are certain guys who join a martial arts club, go for all the lessons, do all the belts if they can afford them, and progress. There are other martial artists who go through the same process, can't afford the belts, but get much, much better simply because they kind of compensate for the fact that they can't afford the belts. So you can have a yellow belt sparring with a black belt, and the black belt loses to the yellow belt because the yellow belt's been doing it for 4 years and the black belt's been doing it for 2 or 3. So, or simply because the yellow belt is just more skilled. And then there are the people who join a martial arts club, pay for special classes, and get the belt much quicker, but don't develop the skills. And these kind of people do this so that they can progress faster. They don't want to be with the white belts. They do not want to be classed as a white belt. They're ashamed of it. They don't understand that it's a good system for progression of ability. And the flat earth is the same. Now, in the flat earth, there might be people who others consider as a higher belt, a higher grading. You know, Matt Powland, Eric Dubay, Jeranism, Mark Sargent, people. But this idea of this classification, because somebody's been doing it longer, therefore, no, because somebody's been doing it longer, the phases that we all go through, they've been through already. So in a term, in a sense, it does apply. But you can have a complete novice, somebody completely amateur, come into the flat earth, realize the flat earth, and come to an observation that advances the whole study much, much faster than any of the guys that have been doing it for longer. It isn't a case that you have to pay your dues, you have to put your time in. That's not what this is. It breaks.
No, there's no peer review system scrutinizing anything.
There's no peer review. Yes, there's no peer review. There's no blacklisting because you said something or thought something. In fact, this is something I'd like to address. We are talking about subliminals and human response. We have 2 human responses towards certain people in the flat earth. I'll say Patricia Steer gets massively criticized for the fact that she's quite effective, and in my eyes, she's lovely to look at. I enjoy, looking at her, and I enjoy looking at the people she's interviewing. We're not sat there going, whoa, sex like freaking star gods seems to do. It's makeup, no makeup. People are sitting there reacting to their human preconditioned. She's wearing makeup, therefore she's a whore. She's got big boobs, therefore she's a porn star. Or it's just ridiculous things. And any flat earthers who have that response, should really check themselves and check the source of their conditioning, which results in this response. They should really check this, because we know that all of these people are human beings. Now, personally, if I was a woman, I wouldn't wear makeup. I know women who are my age who don't wear makeup. It's simple. There are other women who do. I don't think they're wrong because they've decided to. You know, it's just how the mentality behind it needs to be kind of analyzed. The same as some of the people's reactions to the flat earthers who do not ascribe to the Bible and to certain religious beliefs, which automatically are seen as kind of a little bit possibly enemy of the truth because it's in the Bible. It's like, no, look at your beliefs and study. You'll find that the truths in the Bible were actually on the walls in Egypt before the Bible was written. Those truths were there. The same stories, the same order were back there. And they weren't talking about Yahweh. They were talking about Ra. So this idea that the truth is the living word of God is so, you have to detach yourself from logic in order to endorse that. Just the idea of the God, that the intelligent energy can communicate with people, I don't doubt that. I think it does it continuously all of the time in a two-way loop, sometimes maybe just listening, but through dreams, through events, who knows, that some people might derive a sense of the communication that's distinct from mine. I have no right to say, no, that's not true. But I do have the right to say, this story in this book is false and demonstrably so. I'll give you one example. The book of Job describes Job first as perfect, which later on in the Bible, there are all kinds of people saying there's nobody perfect other than God. But this describes him as perfect, one. And two, it describes him as the greatest man in the East. And at the time, regardless of what time anybody tries to claim it was set at, regardless of what time, the Chinese were already more advanced and already had emperors. And surely whatever emperor was existing in China at the time was greater than that man, because the reason he's described as great is not his perfection, it's his possessions. How great he is comes along with the description of his possessions. And surely the emperor of China had greater possessions. So that story of Job, and the fact that it discusses how Lucifer went in for an audience with God, and that God didn't know where Lucifer had been, and all of this tells you this is a fabricated story. This is a made-up story. Nobody was taking notes. Nobody found a dictaphone that somebody secretly recorded the session and transcribed it into a book. It's just made up. And for people to not accept this because of the rest of the story and how he puts up with his burdens, or excuse it as, yes, it's made up, but it was made up so that people would, all of that. No, there's no valid reason for a made-up story to be put in a book as if it was fact. Now, to put it in there as parable and discussed as parable, sure, we do this with Proverbs, we do this with anecdotal evidence, with, we do this all the time, but we don't pretend that it's true. And to make out like something is true is not legitimate. And it's time that people stop doing this, especially when those people are ones that are attacking flat earthers who don't endorse those stories. We don't need to have battles and challenges. Examine your beliefs. I examine mine. I haven't finished. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But examine your beliefs, the structures of your beliefs, how those beliefs were inculcated. Now, the parts of your beliefs that give you a sense of well-being and benevolence and benevolent judgment of others, those are justified. True. So Satan could write a book and somebody could interpret something from that book that is used for good. Doesn't mean that that was the intention of the book. Okay, so if you derive a way of looking at the world with benevolence from the Bible, brilliant. But the comments that people make who are supposed to believe in the Bible say you are believing, your belief system has been inculcated to a point where you believe your judgment of others is justified, voicing it is justified, and the repercussions of your negativity are justified simply because you believe that your beliefs endorse that. And that's false and it's wrong, and you should re-examine your beliefs.
Yeah, it's surprising that people don't do it day in, day out, hour in, hour out after finding out the Earth is flat. But you still see it time and time again. People will take their preconceived notions, put them into their new understanding, and then dance around them. Well,
it's like there are kind of two versions or two avenues for the flat Earth. There are the people who've always thought there's something not right with the world, there's something suspicious, who've always had an inkling, a sense, an intuition that things aren't quite how we're told. There's something behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz kind of worldview. I don't know if I trust what I'm being told by this politician or this organization. There are people who've had that sense of the world, and that's until the point that they come across the freaking flat Earth and go, okay, this is the foundation for the whole thing. This is what they've been hiding, and this is why they've been hiding it. So that they're hiding other things, sure, but this is a fundamental thing. All of those things, the transhumanism, the culling of the population, whatever it is else that they're hiding, this destroys those things. It destabilizes those things. And there's the people who arrive at the realization of the flat Earth because they've had a deep held suspicion from the beginning, which psychologists would say is a disorder. And then there are people who arrive at the flat Earth because it confirms their religious education, simply. That their religious education might involve a bit of paedophilia, a bit of misappropriation of funds, various different nefarious qualities that can be disregarded because what being taught correlates to the flat Earth. And I'm thinking these guys need to re-examine everything that they believe and find that the reflections of the flat Earth in the Bible, in the Quran, in any religious text is a reflection of the real world. Lots of other things are put on that for gain, for personal gain, for hierarchical structures, for all kinds of systems, like the horrible mislike of people who are gay. Okay, if somebody's gay, I don't think they've thought, I could. Okay, so a guy, I could be attracted to women, or I could be attracted to guys. I think I'll go for guys, you know. And bisexual people, I'm attracted to women, but I'm also attracted to guys. For us to think, no, you don't have a right to do that, and to think they're doing that because they've been programmed to, or because it's part of the system that's going to bring down society altogether. People have all kinds of bent of mind. The only thing we have to really look out for is the passing on of suffering. And to think we're going to stop this gay person from causing suffering down the line by causing suffering to this gay person, you have just fucked up, and you have done the looking into the abyss that Nietzsche described. When looking into the abyss, be careful, because the abyss is looking into you. You know?
Yeah, that's pretty profound.
Yeah, when you gaze into the abyss, you must... when gazing into the abyss, know that the abyss is gazing also into you. For when you make war with monsters, you should take care not to become a monster. That's the full quote. And it's true, you know, and people excuse it all of the time. I'm being a monster, but I'm justified in being a monster. It's like, no, being a monster is not justified. It's not justifiable. But let's get back to the whole programming and propaganda and the construction of the mechanics, the fourth wall mechanics, the structure that we're supposed to be discussing, I think we've kind of veered off quite a lot.
Well, not really, in the respect that the way that let's say the Bible as opposed to the church. I mean, I know I've got commenters saying, well, there's loads of different translations, even in English. How do you square that circle? And you can't really divert away from that point. Yes, it's very much true that it's been a construct. My dad did a little play about Tyndale where he went and explained how he took the original text and translated them into English, because the translations that were out there were so added to and so fabricated that you had context on context in a very simple statement. So you'd have just to keep it juicy, he picked the circumcision of Christ as the story that he focused on. And in the translation, it ends up being something like, it came to the time that the baby had to be circumcised. And that was the statement. But in the stories that were the translations before that, there's a great big song and dance and affair about that. And it links back in, because right at the beginning of the show, we're talking about devil worship. And it's the reflection of that. If we are in school or in church, or however you're introduced into this information or this religious doctrine, you're given the impression of omnipotence through your teachings of God, but you're also left with the idea of the polar opposite being the devil. So when you're exposed to, what was the example you gave, the Alex Jones example? Bohemian Grove. When you're given things like that, you then have the same ideas conjured. You have our powers that be worshipping Satan, who is the opposite and equal in terms of power to God, and you have a lot of knowledge behind that in God and in the religious education that we've been given. So it does tie into the way that our lives are presented, especially as there is so much Illuminati and Satan worship style programming in our media. And as we've talked throughout the whole show, this all links back into the overall lie, the overall flatness of our earth.
Yes, actually, you've just reminded me with the Bohemian Grove, and when we were discussing how people create, how illusions, fantasy is created into illusion through words and iconography, and eventually this becomes beliefs. If we try to imagine the mindset, not so much of a psychopath, because we can only guess at the mindset of a psychopath, and we only have really their word on it, and they could be lying just to get to have a last laugh. But if we think of the mindset of the people who are involved in the world, in the dark world, they will have rationalized their stance, their view of the world. They will have rationalized their existence and their actions. Now, they can rationalize them as pleasing to Satan, pleasing to Lucifer, or even necessary as guardians of humanity. So the New World Order and the Illuminati consider themselves guardians of humanity. So according to their supposed unspoken, unwritten remit, they are here to make sure humanity survives, that we don't devour the whole world and end up extinct. That's why they want to cull the population, to make sure that it carries on. This is their rationalizing of their actions, their worldview. Doesn't mean it's true. It's not going to happen. We know that the New World Order is already way behind schedule. And I commented recently that on somebody else's chat, that for us to see that the New World Order and the Illuminati is finished, is already finished, we have to look outside of the remnants of the New World Order. We have to look outside of mainstream media, of mainstream politics. We have to look outside of this and look at, for instance, a video about Muammar Gaddafi that Dearth, deep inside the rabbit hole, made. I say Dearth because people keep making that mistake. But deep inside the rabbit hole, put this documentary together about Muammar Gaddafi. The fact that now people know this, it shows us actually this hope this whole idea that the New World Order and the Illuminati and the police state and the dictatorships and all of these things are taking place is not the case. We still have bankers who are corrupt, and we still have companies who are corrupt, but they are being dismantled. And in the life of Brian, you've seen the life of Brian, haven't you, Nathan?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you have the PFJ, the People's Front of Judea, and they're making these demands on the Roman Empire. They're going to kidnap Pilate's wife, and they're going to demand that the whole Roman Empire be completely dissolved within 3 days. It's a little bit kind of, I don't know, delusional to think that that would be possible, okay? So for us to think that the New World Order and the Illuminati going into the past as simply a historical glitch or a historical stage that humanity went through, whilst we're at that stage of it dying, to think that it would just happen in a week or so and then we would see suddenly all the benefits come to fruition is a little bit, I don't know, it's not delusional, that's not the word I want. It's silly for us to think that we would immediately see the improvement of everything across the world, just like immediately at an exponential rate. No, it's going to happen slowly.
What happens to the Judean People's Front?
Say again?
Can you remember in the story what happens to the People's Judean Front?
So there's the People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front.
Correct.
The Judean People's Front, they end up in a fight with the
People's Front of Judea.
In the temple, yes.
Correct. So in other words, you have two factions that want exactly the same thing. And although this false dichotomy hasn't quite yet reached the flat earth, it's trying in terms of people pitting other people against each other in terms of maybe the model that they pick. But ultimately, in the Life of Brian example, you have two people who have a common goal and they end up fighting each other to the death.
Yes, like I've just said about people who have beliefs that cause them to think that it's justified to attack other flat earthers. I'm not attacking, I'm just saying, hold on. Now, in a fight, to say, hold on, it's not the same as an attack, okay? So I'm saying, hold on. Like Brian, hey, let's work together in that scene. So when I said earlier that their tools, the tools they've used against us, against people discussing the conspiracies, be it the drug running into America by the CIA, all the different things, the tools that have been used in all of those scenarios are failing. So the ridicule is failing. The divide and conquer is failing because we ultimately still have the flat earth. And somebody can have the flat earth because of a biblical belief that I completely disagree and reject, but I won't reject them as a human being because I'm a flat earther, and I won't reject the flat earth observations. We rather than seeing only the differences, we see the similarities. So the divide and conquer that they have tried to do with Eric Dubé off on his own over there, with people saying, dude, don't be off on your own over there, contribute, don't ostracize yourself, don't expatriate yourself or try to expatriate everybody. Don't do this. Don't be silly. We're all here for the same reason, and we're all striving for the same thing, which is clearer understanding of the world and clearer understanding of the mechanisms that deluded us, so that history doesn't repeat itself. So with the divide and conquer, it's not working. What's happening is really somebody makes a really horrible, spiteful comment, other people might join in, and all of those people end up either ostracizing themselves or eventually coming to realize that, that wasn't very nice, and then having a turnaround in their opinion and realizing some of the stuff that they didn't realize was there, molding their opinion of the world, and eventually coming back as a newer, less polluted psyche.
Yes, definitely. I think it's probably about time we wrapped up. We've been on for a good couple of hours now, but just before we do, this was, again, probably one of the last subjects that we'll discuss now, but something we discussed yesterday, which was a globe proof that I struggled to wrap my head around even while I was making the video about it, because it seemed so asinine, so unbelievably contradictory to what we actually observe. And it's an interesting one because a troll or a trolley style videographer made this point using David Weiss, and it was about the direction of the moon's travel. And if you would, can you wrap up the show by telling us a little bit about that, and then I'll say goodbye to the people who've tuned in, and we'll sign out if that's good by you, Antonio.
Yes. So some person took an audio clip of David Weiss mentioning that the moon goes around the Earth every 25 hours or so, and he was corrected with the interjection that no, actually it goes around the Earth once in a month, which is the theory. And David Weiss very cleverly took that, which is what this person made, kind of trying to laugh at David Weiss, and put it in his own website to say, this is the kind of attack that we have, which is really futile, because the reality is the moon does go around over the Earth once a day. Well, it's just over once a day. It's just a little bit more than 24 hours. It does do that. That it isn't doing that, and instead our relationship to the sun is causing the impression, because we're spinning 24 hours and therefore also spinning 24 hours past the moon, makes this effect in the sky, is pataphysics. It's not true. It does. The same as the sun makes its journey across the sky, the moon makes its journey across the sky. There's no orbit, there's no differentiation between the truth and the illusion that we have. One illusion being that we spin and the moon makes this long orbit. It's laughable, because when you see that their explanations for the globe have to omit specific things that prove that their explanations are false, like, for instance, that the light from the sun does not hit perpendicular to the illuminated area. They cannot explain this. There is not a way of explaining it, because if there's no atmosphere out there, there can be no refractive curving of light from the sun to the moon. They can't and they haven't concocted some explanation for it. So they just don't mention it. That the first sliver of a new moon, just after the new moon, or the last sliver before the new moon, that those slivers should only ever be possible in the same portion of the sky where the sun is, and therefore day, and therefore impossible at night. All of those things are just not discussed. Instead, we have this remote, removed from the Earth explanation of what's going on. Say, wait, explain it from the Earth. How about you explain it from the Earth? They can't, because they would have the sun here, the sliver of the moon here, the Earth rotating. Well, what about other times we see the sliver of the moon when we're over here looking into nighttime? What about those slivers? So they can't do it. They just omit those pieces. And I just think it's really good the way their model can be used to destroy their model. It's just,
my example was more specifically about the direction of travel. So if you just literally look up or time lapse the sun and the moon, they're both traveling from east to west, and you can watch them pretty much do the same thing on any given night. Yet in the heliocentric explanation, the moon does the complete opposite. It travels from west to east. And the explanation we're given is that it takes a month to do so. Wherein in reality, you've only got to look up and see it do it day in, day out, traveling across the sky every single night from east to west.
Yes, there's something. Yes, absolutely. There's also something else. And I discussed this, and we're going back to the eavesdropping equipment and the planting of programming and propaganda or advertising. Last night, I looked at the crescent moon, and it was way due north. It was north-northwest. So I get my compass and I check, and it's way north-northwest. So I come on the computer. Now I have my iPhone with my compass. I couldn't find my physical compass, but it would have ratified because I know which direction north is, because that's where Manchester is from my location. And the moon's looking like it's going to set very close to Manchester. I'm directly south from Manchester. Now, excuse me. I get my compass, I check. That's north-northwest. I come onto the computer and I check mooncalc. It's telling me the moon is setting much more to the west than to the north. I then go back and check my compass, and my compass is shifted so that it's calibrated and that showing the same as mooncalc. Now, the real world tells you where the moon is setting. The programs tell you where it's convenient for the globe model for it to set. And the only way to verify this is with actual physical empirical observation. It's empirical evidence that will tell you what the moon is doing, where it's going, in what direction to your indexical point of view, it's setting and rising, all of these things. And the models will just represent what's convenient for them to represent. Which, for example, when you have the moon, on mooncalc, you have the moon and the face of the moon, but it doesn't show you which way it's lit. Okay, so from Britain, the moon is sometimes lit as a sliver that's lying down slightly. But mooncalc doesn't show you this. It only shows you the portion that's illuminated, because they can't predict at which angle it's actually illuminated. And the recent lunar reconnaissance orbiter explanation of the moon doing this oscillation back and forth is new. 20 years ago, there's no description of, and I don't mean that doing this, I mean this rocking back and forth.
Do you mean libration?
Clockwise. Say again?
Is it libration that you're describing, where it shows the extra extremities of the moon on the sides?
No, not the libration, the actual angle, the oscillation. They call it the oscillation, even though that's the incorrect term, because oscillation would only be if you were looking from its north pole. So this wheeling back and forth, clockwise, anti-clockwise, of the lit portion of the moon and of the moon itself. Okay, this is new. If you checked 20 years ago, there's no mention of this whatsoever at all. There is no mention in astronomy of this rocking back and forth, because it hadn't been observed, it hadn't been noted. And this is one of the things that globalists object about we flat earthers. We make observations of things that have never been observed before, or noticed, or explained. We made these observations, they reject them, then explanations are made for these observations that we've made, and then they give us these explanations back as if that's explaining it, especially regarding the curvature and the inverted mirage, okay, which obviously doesn't work because it's not actually upside down. They object to normal human beings having bona fide observations of the world that disprove the globe. Observations that don't disprove the globe, they just think are interesting. But observations that disprove the globe, they object to it, because we're not astronomers, because we're not physicists, because we're just normal human beings, as if we don't have ability to observe, an ability to reason, and ability to discuss. They object to it. It's almost as if they assume that we think we're superior, and we're telling them that they're inferior. And this is not the case. What's usually the case is the opposite. They see themselves superior. We make an observation that they think, wow, how come I didn't have an observation like that? And they reject and they react.
Yeah, I get those moments all the time. You could see another flat earther's observation said to me once or twice, where people have said, damn, why didn't I think of that? And it's a kind of childlike wonder being a flat earther.
Yes, it's brilliant when somebody shows something that you haven't come across before, which is why I urge as many people. There's one guy, Malcolm X, he'll probably be watching this. Malcolm X just compile the stuff that you share, just compile it in a video. You don't need to narrate it. You can find music for free on YouTube, download that, detach the audio and attach it to your video, and just let it play. Let people see the stuff you're finding. I urge closet flat earthers to step out of the closet and bring their observations. Some people are bringing observations about the quality of life and how life changes, spiritual qualities. They're all bona fide, and they all warrant being exposed or explained or discussed, all of them. Please don't sit there and think that trolls will come down your throat and flat earthers won't defend you. That's not going to happen. You can just remove trolls' comments, you can delete them, you can engage with them, whatever you want. But so many people, Mark Sargent describes it as the hive mind. Okay, I made the observation that the blue marble has a size that can't accommodate the rest of the continent. It can't. Okay, and the globes have been made according to the blue marble, hence the discrepancies in the ocean distances and various different things. So it was just an observation that I made, and I put it out there, and brilliant. Other people see it and go, oh my God, yeah, true, brilliant. How come I didn't think, oh wow, if only. It's all great. And like you said, we love it. We go, oh my God, that's so true. Wow, how come I didn't think of that? But it's never, I'm not going to accept that because I didn't think of it. So I urge flat earthers to make videos and put your observations, because some of your observations will strike people the same way as some of the things that have struck Nathan and me and all the other flat earthers. All of us have seen stuff that made us go, oh wow, of course. And then we can go and check it and test it and discuss it. So don't think that because you haven't made videos, or that because your observations might seem a bit flimsy to you, make a video. We will have other people will discuss, will have an input, and you can create something, you can uncover a truth for which you happened to be the catalyst. Do you remember yesterday when I said, and this is, I'll close off with this. Yesterday when I explained how in Spanish, my original language is Spanish, which is why I feel like this sometimes in some of my videos, you know, when I say hello. So it's very easy for me to do, and it's just a little bit of fun. But the Spanish language, when somebody has an idea, they don't say, oh, I had this idea. They say, an idea occurred to me. An idea happened to me. And maybe because of my background, I actually accept the world as being something that presents ideas to you, maybe because you happen to have a resonance that made that idea gravitate towards you. Maybe that's what happens. I don't know. But when you have an idea that just pops into your mind, that you have not sat there constructing like Red's rhetoric, you've not sat there constructing an idea that you then say, I constructed this idea, I created this idea, I have this idea. Instead, with a lot of flat earthers, ideas occur to us. Things pop into our minds, observations, realizations, and I don't take ownership of them. I'm happy to not take ownership of them, you know, to think, oh, that's interesting. I don't pat myself on the back and think, aha, brilliant observation. Oh, brilliant. No, it could have happened to somebody else, and it does. The 100 monkey syndrome is true. And the tipping point is true. We do have ideas that occur in different minds, or simultaneously, or definitely without physical connection between the two, physical communication, ideas that pop into different people's minds, that those minds are not conjuring up or creating. Those minds are simply receiving. And a lot of flat earthers will be out there right now, I'm sure, going, yeah, I have received ideas, notions, observations that have just popped into my mind. It's because I think that kind of establishes that that's how things happen. And also Tesla explained that that's how the ideas came to him. So you know, I like the fact that Tesla actually explained this and discussed this, explained how the ideas come to him, and the tools for analyzing those ideas mentally also came to him. So he didn't develop them, they came to him.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to round out the show, to say, if you're having a realization, don't hesitate to share this idea with people and fear the ridicule. I think on that note, Antonio, we'll have to sign out and say thank you very, very much for joining myself, Nathan Oakley, and Antonio Subirats for this Mechanics of the Fourth Wall. Thanks, Nathan, for being here, Antonio.
If I can just say one last thing, I think that the way that these ideas arrive at us cannot be interrupted by the mechanisms of subliminal and propaganda. I think those things are there to try to change our vibration so that ideas don't resonate towards us. But I don't think that the actual ideas can be completely separated or stopped or shielded from us. I think that's what they would like, but I don't think that they can do this. So I just wanted to say that.
Good point. Once again, Antonio, thank you very much for joining me on Mechanics of the Fourth Wall.
It's been great. Thanks, Nathan.
And for all of you who have been joining us live or in the chat feed, thanks. I've been Nathan Oakley. I'll see you all in the next video.